بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. A brief fa'idah from the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala says, حدثنا يونس قال حدثنا عبد العزيز يعني ابن عبد الله بن أبي سلمة عن ربيعة بن أبي عبد الرحمن عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه أنه قال توفي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وما في رأسه ولحيته 20 شعرة بيضاء. Imam Ahmad, he mentions his chain of narration that goes back to Anas ibn Malik, may Allah be pleased with him, who said, who reported, who narrated that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam died and he didn't have more than 20 gray hairs. He didn't have more than 20 gray strands of hair in both his head and his beard. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam died, the only gray hair that he had was that which equaled 20. This hadith teaches us many things, and it gives us several benefits from the things that it teaches us, and the benefits that it hands us by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is how the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were aware, conscious, they were full aware of the ahwal al-Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the states, the circumstances, what was going on with the Prophet of Islam while he was alive, towards the end of his life, and upon death. How they noticed everything that needed to be noticed about the Prophet ﷺ, rather they noticed things that many people wouldn't necessarily give that much importance to. So if the Sahaba knew how many gray hair the Prophet ﷺ had, then what do you think the companions knew about the Prophet ﷺ's prayer, fasting, his hajj, how he fought on the battlefield, how he treated people, how he dealt with people? What were the core teachings of Islam? What were the polished extras of Islam? What do you think they took from him and they learned from him if they knew his gray hair and his head and his beard? So this is what the ulama of Islam say, min madahiri inayat sahabati bis sunnah, from the manifestations of how the companions conserved and preserved the sunnah. So how was the sunnah written down? How was it conserved? How was it documented? How do we know that it's kept authentic, etc., etc., etc.? There are many steps, there are many phases, and this is from the beginning steps and phases, is that they actually looked at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, fi kulli shay, in every single thing. And the only reason why they looked at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for everything and noticed everything, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was of utmost importance. Rather, he was their salvation. He was their way out of hell and their way into paradise. He was the one who was the cause, by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who allowed them to go from dhulumat to nur. So from that belief of the necessity of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the need of following him, watching him. Obviously, you can't follow someone if you don't watch them. You can't obey someone if you don't know anything about them. You can't believe in, etc., etc. And that established them looking, keeping their eyes peeled, their ears attentively listening. And from that came later on writing down, versus the opposite, which is oftentimes, not 100%, what is oftentimes the Western approach. And that's to write down everything. Everything write down. Why are you writing it down? What's the purpose of you writing it down? Why do you need to write this down? What does it do for you when you write it down? The average person in college, the average scribe, he doesn't know. He's just writing it down. You ever seen somebody take notes in a class and then just taking notes and taking notes and taking notes and taking notes? You ask them, what's the class about? After the class is done, give me 3 things that you wrote down. They can't tell you, and that's because they're trained just to write. How authentic? Did you compare the notes? Did you rewrite them, etc.? Just write it down. Whereas overseas, in the Middle East, Arabia, the time of the companions, even to this day, more attention is oftentimes paid on hifd and the concept of why you're memorizing something. But besides pen versus heart, memory, etc., the concept of the companions weren't there just to write things down. Writing things down wasn't the most important thing to them. What's important is paying attention and looking and seeing and realizing that we have to keep our eyes on this man Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam because he's our salvation by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if and when there's a need to write it down, that's what they did. When there was a need. And when there was a fear of things being lost, companions being martyred, companions dying, so on and so on and so forth. So Anas narrates how many gray hair he had, and this shows us كيف كانوا يهتمون بأحوال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, how they looked at the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. There's several hadiths like this: how he slept, the Prophet how he snored, how he woke up, what side he slept on, what foods he was fond of, what fruits he ate, what fingers he used when he ate, what was his favorite part of the lamb, etc., etc., etc. As far as the other religions, then they barely have bits and pieces of their supposed prophet or supposed messenger. The messengers and prophets that we believe in, or the messengers and prophets which we don't, they're just made up. They barely know. They can't agree on the basic things of Christ. What language he spoke. What was the color of his skin? Was Jesus white with red cheeks? Was he dark? Was he brown? Did he have straight hair or woolly hair? They differ so much just about Christ. Just about Christ. They barely have anything that is preserved and documented accurately from Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. As far as us, how many hair, what? Did the prophet have? The gray hair. What you got? You ask a Christian, seriously. Well, let's have a debate. Let's have a challenge. What do you have? Tell me. Well, I think Jesus was black. And then a European says, no, he was white. He had pale skin, blue eyes, such and such, such and such. And then a third says this. Then a fourth says that. And a fifth, and a sixth, and a seventh. Okay, well, us Muslims, why you guys fight and argue over this and that? We're going to discuss the Prophet's gray hair and how it was documented, how it was memorized, how it was preserved. And this is a tremendous point, brothers and sisters, with regards to using hadith and its sciences for dawah to non-Muslims. And at best, the different religions, they have things which are outdated. At best, it's outdated as a whole system. The core values, certain things which are acceptable in Islam, that's not what we're debating over. Thou shalt not kill. God is one. Thou shalt love one's neighbor. Thou shalt not fornicate. Thou shalt not steal. There's no issue. But we're talking about their deen as a whole. At best, it's outdated. And at worst, it is made up, mixed up, innovated, distorted, warped, twisted, and the words of men included in the words of Christ, and the words of Christ included and mixed up with the words of God. And that's the Bible, the New Testament. That's Christianity, Catholicism, and the list goes on. And of course, many other religions are far worse than that. Far worse than that. So this is a tremendous hadith here. Also, from that which we benefit from this narration is that the Prophet was a mortal being. He was a human being. And not like what some Muslims may believe or think, that the Prophet did not die. And the Prophet was of some type of divine matter. Whereas he wasn't a man, he wasn't a human being, he did not die, and Allah did not shame him or dishonor him or disgrace him by giving him death, which is widespread in many different Muslim aqidas. That's batil. The Prophet ﷺ was a man, he was a human being, and he passed away. Another fact that we take from this hadith is that the Prophet ﷺ is not to be called upon. He's not to be worshipped. He's not to be invoked. He's not to be supplicated to, whereas he died. And whereas he was a man who aged, just like the other men died, became weak, became ill, became sick, and they aged. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Another fact from this hadith is despite the Prophet ﷺ dying and leaving this world, how Allah had preserved him, whereas he only had 20 gray hair in his beard and his head. Need we say more? Some brothers aren't even 60, and what? No. وهكذا. طيب, whether it's from genetics or stress or lifestyle or whatever the sabab is, whatever the reason may be. And last but not least, from the fawaid of this hadith is that the Prophet had a beard, right? The Prophet was not a shaven man. He wasn't a clean cut man, right? Rather, he had a beard, and his beard was clear and it was plain. It was clear and it was plain. And this hadith also shows us the virtue of serving the learned and the righteous from both aspects. For a virtuous person to bring a man into his service, and for a man to be brought into the service of a righteous, learned person, a virtuous person. Whereas if Anas wasn't the servant of the Prophet ﷺ, then much of the intimate details and the inside information he wouldn't have got. He wouldn't have gotten. So due to the fact that he was in the Prophet's household, bringing him his water, walking him here, doing this for him, doing that for him, he got to observe. And this is extremely important with regards to learning. You want to study with someone, you want to benefit from a teacher, serve them. And there are many benefits that you get from that. And we know that the culture of knights, we were raised upon King Arthur, reading stories about King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, reading about ancient England. It's how we raise young boys, the stories, the cartoons, the things we would read about in school, at home. And one of the most important aspects of the knight culture was the squire. The squire was the one who served the knight. He brought him his sword, he brought him his armor, he brought him his horse, he cleaned the armor, he did every single thing for the knight. And therefore, at the same time of him serving the knight, he actually learned how to be a knight. So when it was time, when a knight was killed on the battlefield, or he became old, he couldn't get up on a horse anymore, the squire became a knight. And it was a smooth and easy transition. And it wasn't a thing in which it was a foreign thing. Hey, we need someone to be a knight and protect the kingdom now. Protect the king and the queen. Because there was a culture of transition. So they served. So they got, obviously, the skills of knighthood. And they learned humility. They learned how to humble themselves and suck up and swallow their pride. Which many people who wouldn't study knowledge today cannot do. They're challenging the teacher, arguing the teacher. Are you sure about that, Sheikh? Are you sure? 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 Let alone other things which are worse than that. And obviously, it's not much you're going to learn if you don't have the humility. Okay, so Anas radiallahu anhu, he served and he learned. And not only did he get a chance to learn, but he learned for free. For free. So many people, they want to learn, they want it easy, they want it quick, they want it hot out the microwave, but they're not willing to give up anything. And one of the easiest ways of learning things about a person and getting knowledge is to do what? It's to serve them. It's to serve them, let alone the trust. You bring me my water, you bring me my coffee, you bring me my breakfast. You can poison me. So if you don't poison me, you bring me my food, you bring me my this, you bring the car around, how am I going to feel towards you? What knowledge am I going to pour out? Because I trust you. You're the person who takes care of me. You get the psychology behind this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surely knows best. We'll stop here. And if there are any questions, then we'll try to take some. Wallahu alam. Fikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I have one question.
Sure,
I
Akhi.
saw on the YouTube and they have the hair, they said that is the Prophet Muhammad's hair.
Okay.
How they get it and when.
With
But
regards-
thinking about it.
Clear. The Prophet ﷺ's hair
Yes.
having actual artifacts. It's possible. It's possible.
Yes, I'm not saying it is impossible. I say how they get it.
Well-
before he passed away or before, after he passed away,
Clear.
they cut his hair
The
to
com-
put it somewhere to make.
The companions who were with the Prophet, some of his wives, they preserved pieces of his hair. Whether it was from his combs, brushes, whether it's from his bed, his pillow, And they knew that the Prophet ﷺ's physical body was Mubarak. The Prophet, if he ever had to spit or if he made wudu, they knew that was clean and it was barakah in it. So his hair, the follicles, that was barakah.
Yeah.
So they preserved it. Okay? And obviously, like anything else that people pass down, teacher to student, and it becomes a relic. Well, how can that? And of course, some people who say they have the Prophet's hair may not have the Prophet's hair, may be mistaken. They think it's the Prophet's hair, but it's not. Some people may be lying, but for sure there's some people who have preserved certain things. Shoes, a sword, a piece of clothing, a ring. Very possible. But the difference is that the Muslims do not look towards these things like the Catholics do and the other religions in which they worship the relic and connect themselves to the relic more than God. And that's a huge problem. Wallahu a'lam. But it's possible. And it was done, things were kept from the time of the Prophet in the hadiths, which the Prophet gave things to the Sahaba from him. Take this.
Yes.
Preserve this. Use it for shifa by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu alam. And of course, different kingdoms and different dynasties, different governments of the Muslims over the years, they would preserve these relics. And if you go to Turkey today, you'll find many different things like this. Not saying that every single thing is sound and authentic, nor saying that everything is fake though. Wallahu alam.
Wallahu
السلام عليكم بارك الله فيك. معك الكريم. طيب أهلا وسهلا.
I just need a suggestion.
تفضل. Suggestion Sam.
Suggestion from you.
We got 50. تفضل.
Okay, so just a minute. I'm looking for a wife.
Okay.
Okay. So I have 3 children.
MashaAllah.
I'm teaching in a Islamic school.
Okay.
And
You looking for a wife?
I'm looking for a wife.
Okay.
So do you know any app? No, any good app?
A good app?
Where I can find
A good sister. Wallahi, I don't know an app.
Usually,
There are many. And there are websites.
There are many, but I need something where we got some
A direction.
Good people.
Something tayyib.
Tayyib,
I understand.
Yes.
I don't know anything, wallahi. Maybe some of the brothers and the sisters online know an app or a website. I can ask for you though.
Okay.
Like a platform which is good.
Yes, that is a good.
For him to reliable
There are a
platform.
lot of websites and apps available, but the stuff is totally different.
Okay, let me ask. Let me ask for you, Habibi.
Nikah.com and things.
For
like
him.
They're not good.
Okay, let me find out for
Maybe
you.
there are some people, those who follow Quran and Sunnah, they have made some app or
Clear.
for,
People that are trying to be on the path.
that people HadithDisciple like
HadithDisciple marriage app. Maybe. Maybe.
Yes.
Okay, let me find out for you, Habibi. If someone here knows something, they can post it. Let me look into it for you, okay?
Okay, so how can I contact?
Come back to the masjid.
Okay, I will.
طيب.
I have a jacket for you, leather jacket.
Jazakallah khair.
I
Bring
got
it.
some brother, he came.
Okay.
I-
Inshallah.
inshallah
Next
I will
week.
give- I usually give khutbah in school,
Okay.
so I will give to my nephew. He will bring.
Say
Okay?
less. But you gotta come back for the information though.
Oh, I will come.
Inshallah. Barakallah feek. May Allah make it easy.
Inshallah.
Ameen.
Okay, inshallah.
So we don't have a lot of time. Gotta move this car at 7 a.m.
Yes, sir.
First question. Jazakallah khairan, Akhil Habib. Salam to Allah. Watching HD Grub. Looked good. It was good. Khalid always comes through, mashallah. Staying motivated and working righteous deeds from Ali Yusuf. We've spoken that many, many times. MD from Kerala, India. Should we do Raf al-Yadayn when getting up for third and fourth rak'ahs, or even when getting up from Yani? You stick to, as a default, the hadith of Ibn Umar, the 4 times. There are narrations in which the Prophet ﷺ raised his hands other than those 4 times. Okay? Wallahu alam, that's in brief. MB from Marietta, Georgia. Assalamu alaikum. What's your opinion about Western universities possessing artifacts or cardboard dated Quran that doesn't belong to them? How should the Muslims feel about it? Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It depends. It depends. There are many manuscripts and things that the non-Muslims have. It depends on the accuracy. It depends on the collective evidence and the comparative research of those pieces of information and artifacts, etc. Wallahu alam. And the Muslims benefit from whatever they can. They take from whatever they can. And there are many things that were taken, stolen, traded, given, handed over to the West. Things that were taken during the time of the Crusaders, the Mongols, the Templars, Teutonic Knights, travelers, traders, spies, missionaries, etc. It isn't something which is impossible. QG from Bristol, UK. Assalamu alaikum Ustad. In what way can Muslims in the West engage in jihad according to Quran and Sunnah and avoid extremes and negligence? Jazakallah khairan. Well, obviously, that's a very interesting question. I don't think we have the time to answer that right now. What's important is the negative stigma that's been placed around the word, the term, is very strong. And there are countless barriers that have been made between the Muslims and between that act of ibadah. All right? And many of these barriers have been placed by Muslims themselves, let alone non-Muslims, let alone Allahu Alam, who is planted from the non-Muslims into the Muslims, or the ideologies that are planted that are foreign. And there's barrier, wall after wall, between anything coming close and near the word or the term of the act of ibadah. So la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. You have to ask Allah for thabat, ask Allah for guidance, ask Allah for sincerity. Then afterwards, like any other act of ibadah, you have to learn. Jihad in al-Islam is based off of knowledge, it's based off of teachings, what is and what is not. So you learn to the best of your ability. If you can learn by yourself, you learn through others, you learn what is and what is not. Afterwards, you have to implement what you can according to what you can. And there are many things in Islam in which you know about, but it doesn't mean that you have the ability to do it. Some things are needed. There's a need for others. It's an act of community. It's an act of jama'ah. You can't do it by yourself. Or maybe pertaining to a time or place. Or maybe there is a time, there is a place, but you can't get to it, whatever the case may be. What's important is you learn that which is correct according to your ability, and you implement it with your sincerity, okay, according to what you can. And if you cannot at the time or the moment, then be patient, be sincere, and ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to honor you with performing and carrying out that act of ibadah if and when the time comes that you have the ability to do so. That's what I would say with regards to that question. وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ حَسْبُنَ اللَّهُ وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. Our lifestyles, world politics, government, the state of the Muslims, etc., 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 etc. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. It's one thing, we can't do this. This is versus there is no that. It doesn't exist. It's obsolete. There's no need for this anymore. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. The non-Muslims say this, so therefore is no that. The non-Muslims don't allow this. We have agreements with the La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah for something so holy and so sacred to be removed from the Muslims and to be taken out of the Muslims' encyclopedia, removed from their dictionary, perpetually, never ever to come back because of our Western lifestyles, because my daughter goes to college, because my son works here, because the Muslims are living in this non-country. There is no such and such. There can't be any such and such because of this ruler and because of that ruler. And then eventually it becomes forbidden and taboo to say the word, to say the term, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. May Allah Azza wa Jalla not put us through a fitna, and may He allow us to die as Muslims and to be raised as Muslims. That's a huge, 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 huge problem. and Allah's help is sought. Wallahu alam. Q-In from London. Assalamu alaikum Ustad. How do the ulama and students of knowledge understand the criticism found about Imam Abu Hanifa? Some people use those statements to belittle the Imam. Kindly clarify. With the little bit of time that we have, what's important is that Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah is famous. And he's also infamous or infamous. And any man who's that famous, who has fame and infamy, of course, there's going to be a lot of speculation. There's going to be a lot of hearsay. There's going to be a lot of opinions for and against. Some of it is going to be authentic and sound, and some of it isn't necessarily going to be authentic and isn't going to be sound. And there are going to be haters, there are going to be lovers and supporters, and there are going to be zealots, people of ghulu, for and against. So that's a general qaida that you have to know about Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa rahimahullah is hot. His name is hot. He was famous, he was popular back then. He was hot back then. He's popular and hot right now. So whenever someone's hot, an important man, a big man, a real big shot, then there are going to be people for, against, there are going to be lies, there are going to be stories, and there are going to be people who are overzealous for him and against him, hyping him up. He's the best, he's this, he's that. And there are going to be people who are totally extreme on the opposite. He's nothing. He was never nothing. He was this, he was that. So that's a general qaida of any important or famous man. And take that qaida because that is extremely practical and important qaida with regards to navigating and sifting through al-akhbar al-warida, the information that you hear about that person. Don't forget this rule, guys. How do I know what is sound, what they said about Imam Abu Hanifa, what's not sound? You have to have that principle first and foremost. As far as afterwards, then Abu Hanifa was a man. He wasn't perfect. He was flawed as a human, like I'm flawed. Like all the imams, the men are flawed at best. Okay? And of course, there are things that were said about Abu Hanifa which are lies. And there are things that said about Abu Hanifa which were true. Imam Abu Hanifa may have had an excuse. He may have been mujtahid in the issue. Whatever the case may be. Okay? So therefore, Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, like the other imams, there are people who levied criticism against him. And hadith, and fiqh, and his aqidah, and his ittiba', etc. So to deny everything and to reject everything, and to say everything's made up and a lie and this and that, isn't scientific. And to accept every attack on him and agree with anyone who criticized him, we say la. And there's so many different fiqh issues, which Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, he followed those who came before him. And we all know, we don't have a lot of time right now, the predecessors of Imam Abu Hanifa in Kufa, and how Abu Hanifa rahimahullah really strayed from the teachings of his teachers. And those teachers oftentimes really strayed from the teachings of Ibrahim Nakhai. And Ibrahim Nakhai really strayed from the teachings of Abdullah bin Mas'ud. So the concept of Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, right? And others who are Abu Hanifa's teachers. If you compare Abu Hanifa's fiqh views and opinions, you find them in a line of succession. So if Abu Hanifa is wrong on this fiqh issue, that's fine. You disagree, that's fine. But it's not like he just made it up from thin air. It's not like no one who came before him, no one preceded him in that statement. So it's a long discussion, okay? All right, Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, as I said, was criticized in his aqidah. He was criticized in hadith, being a narrator, trustworthy or not, being weak. He was criticized in other issues as well, during his lifetime and after his lifetime. So we take the balanced view. There's no doubt about Abu Hanifa's intelligence and his talent, and Abu Hanifa's contribution to Islam and to the Muslims and to fiqh. And as Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala is quoted to have said that the people are all in debt They're all in debt to Abu Hanifa in fiqh. Alatun. They're all his children when it comes to fiqh, one way or another. They benefited and they learned something from him somehow, one way or another. So Abu Hanifa had a status, and Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, like any other man or imam, was criticized. Some things were right, some things were wrong, some things are in the middle, so on and so forth. Beware of extremism. For or against. That's most important regarding Abu Hanifa and any other imam. May Allah have mercy on Abu Hanifa and all the imams of the Muslims. Wallahu alam. We don't have much more time. We have to stop here. If I didn't get to your question, please forgive me for lack of time. Perhaps another day, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Wa sallallahu sallam wa barak ala abdihi wa rasulihi nabiyina wa imamina Muhammad.